The desert stretched endlessly in every direction, a sea of sand and scrub brush baking under a merciless sun. The highway behind her had disappeared into heat shimmer an hour ago, and now there was only silence, thick, oppressive silence broken occasionally by the whisper of wind through creosote bushes. Sarah gripped the steering wheel of her dying Honda with white knuckles, her 7-year-old daughter Emma asleep in the back seat, and their scraggly terrier mix, Scout, panting beside her. The address on the lawyer's letter sat folded on the dashboard, creased from being opened and reread a dozen times over the past 3 days. Your aunt, Margaret Holloway, has left you her property in Desert Springs, Arizona. Sarah had barely known Aunt Margaret, a strange, solitary woman who'd vanished into the desert 40 years ago after some family falling out no one would explain. Growing up, Sarah's mother had forbidden even mentioning her name. And now, after months of living in their car, bouncing between parking lots and friends' couches, after losing their apartment and watching their savings evaporate, this inheritance felt like either salvation or a cruel joke. The cabin appeared suddenly, rising from the landscape like a memory half forgotten. It wasn't the charming desert retreat Sarah had desperately imagined during sleepless nights. It was a collapsing structure of weathered wood and rusted metal, leaning slightly to one side as if the desert wind had spent decades trying to push it over. The roof sagged dangerously in the middle, and several windows were broken, their glass glittering in the dirt like scattered diamonds. "Mom!" Emma's sleepy voice came from the back seat. "Is this it?" Sarah swallowed hard, forcing brightness into her voice. "Yes, sweetie. This is our new home." Emma pressed her face against the window, her expression unreadable. Scout whined, sensing his human's uncertainty. They climbed out into the heat, and it hit Sarah like a physical force, dry, scorching, stealing the moisture from her lips in seconds. The cabin looked even worse up close. The porch steps were half-rotted, the door hung crooked on its hinges, and the entire structure seemed held together by stubbornness and rust. Inside was worse. Layers of dust coated everything, old furniture draped in sheets, boxes stacked haphazardly in corners, a kitchen that looked like it belonged in a museum. But it had walls. It had a roof, however questionable. And most importantly, it was theirs. "It needs some work," Sarah said, trying to sound optimistic as Scout immediately began sniffing every corner, his tail wagging uncertainly. "Some." Emma raised an eyebrow, too mature for 7 years old. Homelessness had done that, stolen her childhood innocence, and replaced it with a wary pragmatism. Sarah knelt down, pulling her daughter close. "I know it's not perfect, but it's ours, Em. No landlord. No one can kick us out. We can fix it up, make it beautiful." Emma nodded against her shoulder, and Sarah felt hot tears threatening. She blinked them back. There would be time for crying later. Right now, they needed to make this place livable before dark. They spent the rest of the afternoon cleaning. Sarah swept decades of dust and debris, while Emma wiped down surfaces and Scout, helped by tracking dirt everywhere. The water worked miraculously, though it ran rust-colored for several minutes before clearing. The electricity flickered on after Sarah found the breaker box, though several outlets sparked ominously. As the sun began its descent, painting the desert in shades of orange and purple, Sarah stood on the porch and surveyed their new domain. The land stretched out in every direction, nothing but sand, rocks, and hardy desert plants for miles. The nearest neighbor, according to the lawyer, was 7 miles away. They were completely, utterly alone. Scout suddenly bounded off the porch and started digging frantically in a patch of ground about 30 feet from the cabin. Dirt flew up in clouds as his front paws worked furiously. "Scout, stop that!" Sarah called, but the dog ignored her, digging with single-minded determination. She walked over, ready to pull him away, when she noticed something odd. The ground where Scout was digging looked different, slightly sunken, the dirt a different color than the surrounding soil, as if it had been disturbed and then left to settle over many years. "Scout, come on, boy. Leave it." But Scout had found something that made him dig harder. The sound changed, his claws scraping against something solid instead of loose dirt. "What is it, Mom?" Emma appeared beside her, curious. "Probably just rocks." "Scout, that's enough." The dog finally backed away, panting, his muzzle caked with dust. In the hole he'd created, maybe 2 feet deep, Sarah could see the edge of something dark and metallic. Her heart began to beat faster. "Emma, go inside and get me that old broom from the kitchen." As her daughter ran off, Sarah knelt beside the hole, using her hands to carefully brush away more dirt. The metallic object was larger than she'd thought, several feet across. She worked carefully, methodically, as the desert sunset deepened around her. Emma returned with the broom, and Sarah used the handle to probe the edges, loosening more soil. 20 minutes later, as the first stars began to appear, she'd uncovered the outline of what looked like an old chest, metal, heavily rusted, with corners reinforced by iron brackets that had somehow survived decades underground. "What is it?" Emma whispered, sensing the significance of the moment. "I don't know, baby. But I think your great-aunt wanted someone to find it." Sarah tried to pry the chest up, but it wouldn't budge, either rusted shut or held down by something beneath. She'd need tools, leverage, maybe help. But looking at her daughter's excited face, seeing hope there for the first time in months, Sarah felt something shift inside her. Maybe this broken-down cabin in the middle of nowhere wasn't a cruel joke after all. Maybe Aunt Margaret had left them something more than rotting wood and memories. As full darkness settled over the desert, Sarah covered the chest back up with loose dirt, making a mental note of its exact location. Tomorrow they'd excavate it properly. Tonight they needed rest. Inside, they ate canned soup heated on the old gas stove and spread sleeping bags on the cleanest floor they could find. Scout curled up between them, and, for the first time in months, Emma fell asleep quickly, her face peaceful. Sarah lay awake, listening to the desert night, the strange calls of nocturnal creatures, the whisper of wind through cracks in the walls, and underneath it all, the pounding of her own heart. Something was buried out there. Something Aunt Margaret had hidden deliberately. And tomorrow, they were going to find out what. Sarah woke before dawn, her body still programmed to the hypervigilance of living in a car, always alert, always ready to move. But this morning was different. For the first time in months, she'd slept on something other than a car seat, and the ache in her back was a different kind of pain. Emma was still asleep, Scout sprawled across her sleeping bag like a furry guardian. Sarah slipped outside, careful not to wake them. The desert at dawn was breathtaking. All soft purples and pinks, the air cool and almost pleasant before the sun began its daily assault. Sarah walked to the spot where Scout had dug, uncovering the chest again with her hands. In the gentle morning light, she could see it more clearly. Old military-style construction, maybe from the 50s or 60s, with a heavy padlock that had rusted completely through. She needed tools. Inside the cabin, she searched through the chaos, finding a toolbox in what might have once been a workshop. Rust-covered screwdrivers, an old hammer, pliers with seized joints. Not much, but better than nothing. She also found something else, a photo album, its pages yellowed and brittle. She opened it carefully. The photograph showed a young woman, Aunt Margaret, she assumed, standing beside mining equipment, her face sun-weathered but smiling. In several shots, she was with a group of men, all looking serious in their work clothes and hard hats. The dates on the back of the photos ranged from 1981 to 1985. Mining. Aunt Margaret had been involved in mining. Sarah's pulse quickened. She grabbed the toolbox and hurried back outside, where Scout had already returned to the site, his tail wagging excitedly as if to say, "See? I told you something was here." Using the hammer and a screwdriver, Sarah worked on the rusted padlock. It took 15 minutes of careful prying before it finally broke free with a satisfying crack. She pulled it off and tried the lid. Stuck. More prying, more hammering. The metal screeched in protest, and Sarah worried she'd wake Emma, but she was too close now to stop. Finally, with a groan of ancient hinges, the lid lifted. Inside, wrapped in layers of what had once been oilcloth, were bundles of papers, several leather journals, and at the very bottom, a smaller metal box. Sarah's hands shook as she lifted out the first journal. The pages were filled with neat handwriting, Aunt Margaret's, presumably. She flipped through carefully, catching fragments. Survey results confirm, depth indicates, filed claim with county. They can't know danger. The papers were maps, detailed geological surveys with coordinates, measurements, markings in red ink. And there were photographs too, pictures of rock faces, mineral samples, excavation sites. But it was the smaller box that made Sarah's breath catch. Inside were documents sealed in plastic bags. Official-looking papers with county stamps, legal descriptions, claim numbers. And a letter, addressed simply, to whoever finds this. Sarah's hands trembled as she unfolded it. If you're reading this, I'm probably dead, and someone finally found what I spent 40 years hiding. I don't know who you are, maybe family, maybe a stranger who bought the property. Either way, you deserve to know the truth. In 1983, I discovered something while working survey for a mining company out here. A silver vein, not just any vein, but one of the largest undocumented deposits in the Southwest. I filed a private claim, quiet-like, through channels most folks don't know about. It's legal, it's registered, and it's worth more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. But I couldn't touch it. The mining company I worked for had connections, bad ones. When they found out what I'd discovered on land adjacent to their operations, they made threats. Against me, against my family. They wanted the claim, and they didn't care how they got it. So I disappeared. Let them think I'd given up, moved on. I've spent 4 decades living in this cabin, protecting what I found, waiting for them to forget. The original players are probably dead now, but their companies live on, and greed doesn't die. The claim is legal. The maps show you where. The documents prove ownership. It's worth somewhere between $200 and $400 million at current silver prices. If you decide to pursue this, be careful. File everything through proper legal channels. Don't trust anyone who approaches you privately. And know that some people will do anything for this kind of money. I'm sorry I couldn't claim it myself. But maybe you can finish what I started. Margaret Holloway. Sarah read the letter 3 times, each word burning into her memory. $200 million. Maybe $400 million. She looked at the cabin, at the broken-down car, at the sleeping bag visible through the open door where her daughter lay. At the months of struggle, the nights of fear, the gut-wrenching shame of not being able to provide. This could change everything. But Margaret's warning echoed in her mind, be careful. Mom. Sarah turned to find Emma standing in the doorway, rubbing sleep from her eyes. What did you find? Sarah carefully folded the letter and slipped it into her pocket. Something important, sweetie. Something that might help us a lot. But we need to be smart about it. She spent the morning photographing every document, every map, every page of Margaret's journals with her phone. She uploaded everything to a cloud storage account, sent copies to her email, even burned them onto an old CDR she found in a box of computer supplies. Then she reburied the chest, but not in the same spot. She waited until Emma was playing with Scout inside, then moved it to a new location behind the cabin, under a distinctive rock formation she could find again easily. By noon, Sarah was on her phone, searching for mining lawyers in Arizona. The first 3 she called didn't inspire confidence. Too eager, too pushy, asking too many questions. The 4th, a woman named Patricia Chun with a solo practice in Phoenix, was different. If what you're describing is accurate, Patricia said carefully after Sarah gave her the barest outline, you need to be very careful. Mining claims like this attract all kinds of attention, not all of it legal or friendly. Don't talk to anyone else about this. Don't post anything online. And get these documents to my office as soon as possible. I don't have much money for. If this claim is even half what you're suggesting, I'll work on contingency. But Ms. Mercer, I need you to understand. Once we start this process, there's no going back. People will know. And they will come. Sarah looked out the window at the empty desert, at the isolation that had seemed so lonely yesterday and now felt protective. I understand, she said. When can we meet? 3 days later, Sarah sat in Patricia Chen's office in Phoenix, the documents spread across the conference table between them. Emma was with a babysitter Patricia had recommended. The first time Sarah had left her daughter with a stranger in months, and the anxiety gnawed at her. Patricia examined each document with practiced care, occasionally consulting reference books or making notes. Her expression remained professionally neutral, but Sarah noticed her hands moving faster as she worked through the pile. Finally, after what felt like hours, Patricia looked up. "This is real," she said quietly. "The claim is properly filed, properly documented. It's been maintained. Someone paid the annual fees, kept it active. Margaret was meticulous." She paused. "Ms. Mercer, based on these geological surveys and current silver prices, you're looking at a minimum of $200 million. Potentially much more depending on actual vein size and quality." The number didn't feel real. Sarah had been living on the edge for so long that she couldn't comprehend that much money. It was like hearing about the distance to a star, technically factual but meaningless to her daily experience. "What do we do now?" Sarah asked. "We file updated claim documentation with your name as Margaret's heir. We engage a reputable mining consultant to assess current value. We prepare for offers, and trust me, they'll come fast once word gets out." Patricia leaned forward. "But there's something else you need to know. I did some research on the mining company Margaret mentioned in her letter. Rocky Mountain Extraction. They were bought out by a larger corporation in 1995, which was bought out again in 2008. The current entity is Western Mineral Holdings. They're big, Sarah, and they have a reputation for aggressive land acquisition. Can they take the claim? Not legally. Not if we do everything right. But they'll try to pressure you, intimidate you, make offers that sound good but aren't. And," Patricia hesitated, "Margaret wasn't paranoid. There were incidents back in the 80s, mining surveyors who had accidents, claims that mysteriously got tangled in legal complications. Things are more regulated now, but money like this makes people desperate." Sarah thought of Emma, of Scout, of the fragile safety they'd just found. "Should I be scared?" "You should be careful. Document everything. Keep people you trust close. And don't stay at that cabin alone, at least not until we get security measures in place." But Sarah didn't have anywhere else to go, didn't have money for hotels or the luxury of fear. The cabin was all they had. She returned to Desert Springs as the sun was setting, Emma chattering excitedly about her day with the babysitter. The isolation Sarah had feared now felt like a shield. Out here, she could see anyone coming from miles away. That night, after Emma fell asleep, Sarah sat on the porch with Scout and studied the desert. The moon was nearly full, painting everything in silver light. She thought about Margaret, living here alone for 40 years, protecting her secret. What had that loneliness felt like? What had sustained her? Scout's head suddenly lifted, his ears perked. A low growl rumbled in his chest. Sarah's blood went cold. "What is it, boy?" Then she saw them. Headlights in the distance, moving slowly along the dirt road that led to the cabin. No one had any reason to come out here. Not at 10 o'clock at night, not down a road that led nowhere but to Margaret's property. Sarah's mind raced. Patricia had filed the updated claim just that afternoon. How could anyone know already? The vehicle, a large pickup truck, stopped about 100 yards from the cabin, just beyond the reach of the porch light. It sat there, engine running, headlights blazing. Sarah couldn't see inside past the glare. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 2 minutes, the truck turned around and drove away, taking its time, as if making a point. "We know you're here. We know what you have." Sarah didn't sleep that night. She sat by the window with her phone charged, 911 ready to dial, Scout alert beside her. Every shadow became a threat, every desert sound a potential intruder. But no one returned. In the morning, exhausted and jittery, Sarah called Patricia. "Someone came last night. Just sat there in their truck, watching." Patricia's silence spoke volumes. Finally, "I'm sending someone to install a security system. Cameras, motion sensors, the works. And I'm hiring a security consultant, someone to stay there with you until we get this sorted. I can't afford. It's part of the case expenses. If this goes through, and it will, you can pay me back from the proceeds. Right now, safety is the priority." The security team arrived that afternoon. A former sheriff named Marcus who looked like he'd been carved from desert rock, and a tech specialist who installed cameras that fed to Sarah's phone. By evening, the cabin was transformed into a fortress, at least digitally. "Anyone comes within 100 yards, you'll know," the tech specialist said, showing Sarah the app, "and these cameras have night vision. You'll see them before they see you." That night, the truck returned. Sarah watched on her phone as it approached, stopped in the same spot, sat for 5 minutes, then left. She got a clear shot of the license plate this time. Marcus ran it through his contacts. Registered to a rental company in Phoenix. Rented 2 days ago. The same day your lawyer filed the claim update. Paid with a corporate card from Western Mineral Holdings. So they knew. And they were making sure Sarah knew they knew. Over the next week, the visits continued. Never threatening enough to call the police, but regular enough to be harassment. Different vehicles, but always the same pattern. Approach, stop, watch, leave. Sarah documented everything. Patricia filed harassment complaints. Marcus increased patrols. And through it all, Sarah felt herself changing. The fear that had defined her months of homelessness was being replaced by something else. Anger. These people, these corporations with their millions and their intimidation tactics, thought they could scare her off. Thought she'd be too weak, too frightened, too desperate to fight back. They didn't know what it meant to truly have nothing. Didn't know what she'd already survived. Didn't know that when you've hit rock bottom, there's a strange kind of freedom in having nothing left to lose. On the 8th night, when the truck approached again, Sarah did something that surprised even herself. She walked out onto the porch, stood in the light where they could see her clearly, and stared directly at the headlights. She didn't move, didn't flinch, just stood there, her message clear. I'm not leaving. I'm not afraid. And I'm not giving up what's mine. After a long moment, the truck drove away. It didn't come back the next night, or the night after that. Patricia called 3 days later with news. Western Mineral Holdings wants to meet. They're offering to buy the claim, $100 million cash, within 30 days. Sarah's breath caught. $100 million. More money than she'd ever imagined. Enough to solve every problem, erase every fear, give Emma a life beyond anything Sarah could have dreamed. What do you think? She asked. Patricia's answer was immediate. I think it's worth at least 3 times that. I think they're trying to buy it cheap before you realize its true value. And I think if you say no, things might get more complicated. Sarah looked around the cabin, at the progress they'd made, the repairs, the small touches that were turning this broken place into a home. She thought about Margaret, holding out for 40 years, never compromising, never selling out. Tell them no, Sarah said. Tell them the claim isn't for sale. The response from Western Mineral Holdings came swiftly and wasn't subtle. 2 days after Sarah rejected their offer, Patricia called with an edge of tension in her voice. They've filed a legal challenge to the claim validity. They're arguing that Margaret never properly maintained it, that there are documentation gaps, that the survey boundaries overlap with their historical operations. Can they win? No. But they can make this expensive and time-consuming. It's a pressure tactic, trying to drain your resources until you're forced to settle. Patricia paused. Sarah, I need to be honest with you. This could take months, maybe years. They'll appeal everything, file motion after motion. It's what companies like this do. They have infinite legal budgets and use them as weapons. Sarah felt the old fear creeping back, the helplessness of being outmatched by people with power and money. But then she looked at Emma, doing homework at the kitchen table, Scout curled at her feet. They had a home now. They had a future worth fighting for. Then we fight, Sarah said simply. The legal battle began in earnest. Patricia assembled a team, mining experts, land surveyors, legal specialists, all working on contingency because they knew the claim was solid. But Western Mineral Holdings had resources that seemed endless. Every document Patricia filed was met with a counterfiling. Every hearing was postponed, delayed, rescheduled. Meanwhile, life at the cabin continued. Sarah enrolled Emma in the small school in Desert Springs, a 30-minute drive away. She found part-time work at the local diner, barely enough to cover food and gas, but it gave them routine normalcy. Marcus stayed on, becoming not just security but family, teaching Emma about the desert, helping Sarah with repairs, his steady presence a comfort. The harassment had stopped being obvious, but Sarah felt watched. Sometimes she'd notice the same car parked along the highway. Sometimes there'd be hang-up calls on her phone. Nothing provable, nothing concrete, but constant enough to keep her on edge. 6 weeks after rejecting the buyout offer, Sarah found something that changed everything. She'd been going through Margaret's journals more carefully, reading every entry, trying to understand her aunt's life. Most entries were mundane. Weather observations, supply lists, lonely ruminations on desert sunsets. But then, in a journal from 1997, she found an entry that made her hands shake. They came again today. Different faces than before, but same message. Sell or suffer consequences. I told them what I've been telling them for 14 years. This claim is not for sale. Not ever. But I'm getting old. My health isn't what it was. And I'm starting to worry about what happens when I'm gone. I've tried to reach out to family, but the bridges I burned 40 years ago can't be rebuilt with a phone call. So I'm writing this down, putting it all in the chest, hoping someone finds it. Someone who needs it enough to fight for it. Someone with nothing to lose and everything to gain. Because that's the only kind of person who can win against people like this. Sarah felt tears sting her eyes. Margaret had known, had planned this, had chosen isolation and loneliness to protect something she hoped would eventually help someone else. "Mom, are you okay?" Emma appeared beside her, concerned. Sarah wiped her eyes. "Yeah, baby. I was just thinking about your great-aunt Margaret, about how brave she was. Are you brave too?" The question caught Sarah off guard. Was she brave? She'd never thought of herself that way. She'd just been surviving, doing what she had to do. "I'm trying to be," Sarah said honestly. That night, after Emma was asleep, Sarah stood outside and looked at the stars, millions of them, visible in a way they never were in the city. She thought about bravery, about fear, about what it meant to fight for something. Her phone buzzed. A text from Patricia. "Call me. Important." Sarah's heart sank. More legal complications, probably. More delays. But Patricia's voice was different when she answered, excited, almost breathless. "Sarah, I just got off the phone with a representative from Allied Mining Corporation. They're Western Minerals' biggest competitor. They've been following the case, and they want to make you an offer, not to buy the claim, but to develop it. Partnership. They handle all costs and operations. You retain 50% ownership of the mine and all profits." Why would they do that? Because if you win this claim, and you will, you control the silver. Western Mineral has wanted that silver for 40 years. This would cut them out completely, and Allied knows it. They're willing to invest millions up front just to spite their competition. Patricia laughed. Corporate warfare at its finest. And you're the one with the leverage. Sarah tried to process this. What does it mean practically? It means you wouldn't have to worry about development costs, mining operations, any of it. They'd do everything. You'd get monthly reports, quarterly payouts, total transparency. And based on their preliminary estimates, you'd be looking at somewhere between $8 and $12 million per year in profit. For life. $8 million per year. The number was absurd. Incomprehensible. "There has to be a catch," Sarah said. "Only one. You have to win the legal battle first. Allied won't fully commit until the claim is unquestionably yours. But they'll cover your legal expenses going forward. They have their own team that will work with me." Suddenly we're not the underdog anymore. After hanging up, Sarah sat in the darkness, overwhelmed. 2 months ago, she'd been sleeping in her car, wondering where the next meal would come from. Now corporations were fighting over her. It felt surreal, like she'd stumbled into someone else's life. But this was her life. This was real. The next morning, she called Patricia back. "Accept Allied's partnership. Let's finish this." The legal battle shifted dramatically. With Allied's resources behind them, Patricia's team filed motion after motion, each one precise and devastating. They proved Margaret's meticulous maintenance of the claim. They documented Western Minerals' historical intimidation tactics. They showed pattern after pattern of corporate malfeasance. Western Minerals' lawyers fought back, but they were losing ground. And everyone knew it. For months after Sarah had first opened the chest, the court issued its ruling. Margaret Holloway's claim was valid, properly maintained, and legally transferred to Sarah Mercer as her sole heir. The silver deposit was hers. Completely, unquestionably hers. Sarah was at the diner when Patricia called with the news. She had to sit down, her legs suddenly weak. Around her, the lunch rush continued. People ordering burgers, complaining about the heat, living their normal lives while Sarah's entire world shifted. "We won," she whispered. "We actually won." "You won," Patricia corrected. "You and Margaret. You saw it through." That evening, Sarah drove out to the spot where the chest had been buried. Scout came with her, tail wagging, as if he understood the significance. She stood there as the sun set, painting the desert in those impossible colors, and thought about Margaret. About the sacrifice, the loneliness, the 40 years of waiting. "Thank you," Sarah said to the empty desert, to the memory of an aunt she'd never really known. "Thank you for believing someone would fight for this. Thank you for choosing us." The wind whispered through the creosote bushes, carrying the day's heat away, and for just a moment, Sarah could have sworn she felt something. A presence, approval, a sense of peace. Margaret's fight was over. and Sarah's new life was just beginning.